And one of the things that you see, this is worth knowing too, because if you're preyed upon by a psychopath, which you will be to some degree at some point in your life, the psychopath who will be narcissistic will presume that you're stupid and that you deserve to be taken advantage of because you're naive and stupid. So it's actually a good thing that he's doing it. And his proof for, and I'm saying he because there are more male psychopaths, the proof that you're stupid, naive, is that he can take advantage of you. And so, like, if you were wiser, you'd be, you know, you'd know his tricks, and then it wouldn't be morally necessary for him to show you just exactly who knows what about what. And so the psychopath will use his ability to fool you as proof of his own grandiose omnipotence, omniscience, and narcissism. And the problem with that is that you can be fooled by a psychopath, and virtually anybody can. So that Robert Hare, for example, who studied psychopaths for a long time and interviewed a lot of them, like hundreds of them, and videotaped many of the interviews, he said when he was talking to the psychopath, he always believed what they were saying. And then he'd watch the video afterwards and see where the conversation went off the rails. But, you know, the proclivity to be polite in a conversation is very strong. And if you're polite, you don't object to the way that the person unfolds their strategy, you know. And psychopaths are pretty good at figuring out how to manipulate, obviously, how to manipulate people. And the probability that you will be immune to that is extraordinarily low. Go watch Paul Bernardo being interviewed by policemen on YouTube. That's that's enlightening, man. Paul Bernardo, he's like the CEO of a meeting in that video, you know. He gives the cops hell, he gives the lawyers hell, he protests his innocence. He basically tells them that they're rude and untrustworthy because they don't trust him because he did a few little things 17 years ago. And he gets away with it, a few little things, right? I mean, he killed a bunch of people, including the sister of his girlfriend at the time, and, you know, he was a repeat sexual offender and murderer. It's like, but he basically goes, well, you know, that's a long time ago. It's like, we're past that, aren't we? I mean, I'm having a discussion with you. I'm trying to help you solve some crimes, which, by the way, I committed, but we won't bring that up. You know, and you're accusing me of being a liar. Like, you're not playing fair. What's up with you? And then when they answer, he looks at his fingernails, which is like, that's a lovely little manipulative thing, because it basically means whatever happens to be under my fingernail at the moment is much higher priority than listening to your foolish story. And you watch, you'll see people do that to you, and then you get a little insight into what they're up to. He's very good at that. And so, or he looks outside, or he just looks at his hands, or he looks out the window, immediately dismissive in his nonverbal behavior. It's brilliant. The courts were forced to release that, by the way, but look it up, Paul Bernardo on YouTube. Wow, it's just mind-boggling. He's so good at what he does. And he's good looking, and he's charismatic, and, you know, he can really pull it off. And you can't tell what's happening with the cops and the lawyers, whether they're just letting him play as a routine to get some information from him, or whether he's actually setting them back on his heels. And I suspect it's a bit of both. But it's masterful performance. If you didn't know who he was, and you were watching it without the audio, you'd think he's the CEO of some company giving his employees hell for not being up to scratch. That's all his body language, his eye contact, everything just speaks that. It's amazing. So anyways, you got these two-bit hoods here who think they're really something. They also think they're tough and dangerous, and they're not. They're just, you know, cowardly and corner dwellers, and they confuse their unwillingness to abide by reasonable rules as indication of their heroic courage, which is something else that low-rent hoods like to do, you know. And it's partly because lots of people who just attend to the law do that because they're cowardly, which is a Nietzschean observation. Are you good, or are you just afraid? Well, let's start with afraid first, before we proceed to good. And that the reason that you follow the rules is because you're afraid of getting caught. Yeah, well, you know those kids who, often university kids who are in like a hockey riot, and they end up breaking windows and stealing things, and, you know, they get nailed for it, and afterwards they're really blown away by their own behavior. It's like, well, they're in that camp. It's like they think they're good people, but they're not. They're just never anywhere where you could be bad. And as soon as you put them somewhere where they could be bad, it's like out it comes, just like that. And that's really worth thinking about, because most of you, many of you, but not all of you, I suspect, have never really been somewhere that you could be really bad and get away with it. And so you might think, well, you wouldn't do it, but people do it all the time. So anyways, they're talking about some exploits, and then they see that this character named Stromboli, who's a marionette, he has a puppet show, right? And he's kind of a wheeler dealer too. And remember, I showed you that mask that was glaring at Pinocchio when he got his voice? It's like Stromboli is one of his manifestations. The fox here is another one of his manifestations. And all the negative characters throughout the movie are manifestations of the same thing. It's partly the adversarial individual, and it's partly the tyrannical aspect of society. It's the negative masculine. That's one way of thinking about it. So, and you know, when men go bad, they often go bad by being antisocial and tyrannical. So, you know, where there's way more antisocial men than there are antisocial women, which is why there's 20 times as many men in jail as there are women. You know, so each gender, let's say each sex, has its own characteristic pathologies. And there are some antisocial women, you know, and there are some high neuroticism guys who are, or some guys who are really agreeable as well. So, but they're rarer. So anyways, he sees this poster advertising Stromboli's puppet show. So Stromboli's a puppet master. Now that's really worth thinking about, because that's an archetypal theme, or it's at least attached to an archetypal theme. Something's behind the scenes pulling the strings. And everybody always wonders what that is, right? What's actually going on? What's actually going on with Trump? Who's actually in control? Is it Putin? I mean, that's the fantasies of the left. It's Putin. It's like, well, the question always is, what's going on behind the scene, right? And the question is, that's the case certainly on the political landscape, business landscape, interpersonal relations. What are you really up to? Everyone's always wondering that, right? That's why they're watching your eyes, because your eyes point at things, and they can infer what you're interested in and what you're up to by looking at what you look at. And that's why your eyes have whites, is so that we can see where you're pointing them, because gorillas don't. And so what that means, roughly speaking, is that all of your ancestors whose eyes couldn't be reliably tracked were either killed or didn't mate. It's a big deal for us to see where people's eyes are pointed. And so we're always watching each other's eyes constantly. What are you up to? What are you up to? What are you looking at? What do you want? And I want to know, because if I know what you want, I can predict how you're going to behave. And that also means I can cooperate with you, or I can compete with you, or I can lie to you. But all the information is in the eyes, surrounded by the facial display, right? Because that's also an indication of motivation and emotion. And so we're like, our eyes are so good at that for you guys sitting there in the back, I can tell if you're looking at my eyes or at my chin. And the deviation in your eyes is so tiny that it's a kind of miracle that we're capable of making that perceptual observation. It's really important to us. So, and we have really good eyes, so that's another thing about us. So anyways, what's going on behind the scenes? Well, if you look at Stromboli, you might be thinking, it's not clear he's someone you'd want to have pulling your strings. Like, there's a little bit of forced enthusiasm, let's say, there, and he's just not a very savory looking character. So anyways, the fox knows him, and they start talking about Stromboli, that old joker, and then how they could possibly involve him in some sort of scam because he's back in town. And then they see the puppet, and the fox does his equivalent of thinking, which is, you know, pretty sad and nasty, but that's what he does. And then they see this puppet with no strings, and they think, hey man, a puppet master would pay a lot for something that is capable of semi-autonomous movement like that. It would be kind of a miracle. And so they decide that they're going to take him to Stromboli. And so they grab him, and he's got an apple to take to the teacher, which I think it's the cat promptly eats. And the fox acts out this sort of false enthusiasm about what Pinocchio is up to and pretends that he's his friend, which is of course what your typical pedophile will do. And so this is in the same kind of category, and it truly is. So, and one of the things that's interesting to know about pedophiles is that they're predatory, right? And so they don't go after kids that are assertive and likely to be noisy. They watch. and they watch to see if they can find a kid who's defeated, and that's good enough, who's defeated, and who's going to need a friend, and who's not going to object. And so when they check out, these are the ones who do the stranger abductions, which are, by the way, extraordinarily rare. They look for a victim type. They look for a kid who's going to be easy to take down. And so, you know, that's one thing you don't want. So you might think, well, one of the things that was really big, and it's probably even worse now, when I was a parent of young children, was to teach your kids how to be afraid of strangers. It's like, no, wrong. That is not what you teach them. Because all you do is teach them then to be timid and fearful, and the real predatory types, they're pretty much thrilled about that, because you'll also make them sheltered and naive, you know. So that isn't, you make your kids courageous and you get their damn eyes open, and that's the best thing you can do to protect them against people who are truly dangerous. So none of that terrifying them. It's not a good idea. You might think, well, why would it be the world outside of what's known and the unconscious at the same time? This weird intermingling of those two things. And as far as I can tell, that's because when you're in chaos and you don't know what's going on, then you start imagining what might be going on. And that imagination is partly the world, as it might be, but it's also partly the structure of your unconscious mind, which is producing the fantasies. And so when you're truly in chaos, then the distinction between your fantasies and reality isn't clear. That's actually part of what constitutes the chaos. So imagine this. So you're in a relationship and the person betrays you. And you knew who they were, or at least you thought you did, before that moment. But now you're looking at them and you don't know who they are. And you don't know what the past was. And you don't know what the present is. And you don't know what the future is going to be. All of that's been thrown up into the air in a major way. That's traumatic. So much has fallen apart that it's traumatic. So what do you start to do? You start to imagine what might be the situation. Well, then the reality is your imagination and the reality at the same time. They're not pulled apart at all. You cannot distinguish between them. And so it was a Jungian idea. I could say that's the snitch that Harry Potter's chasing, by the way. I know that's a terrible leap, but that is what it is. It's that weird intermingling of potential and reality that can manifest itself as the world if you pursue it. It's roughly that. So Pinocchio is in this situation that's half fantasy and half reality, in this chaotic state. And he has to go down to find the thing that he least wants to find. And he's hoping that he's got this intuition that in facing that thing, that chaos, that life really is, that chaos, that he's going to find his father and reunite with him. So you could also say that in some sense it's a decision of faith, I suppose, because you might ask yourself, well, why bother confronting chaos? If chaos is the ultimate reality, then what the hell use is there in facing it? Because it's just going to reveal itself as the ultimate reality and drown you. But the myths always say the same thing. They say, no, if you confront what's really disturbing you, if you really confront it, you do it voluntarily, you're going to find order in it eventually. Or at least that's the only way you're going to find order. Now, it's not like these stories are optimistic, and it's not as if they give you a sure guide to success. That's the other thing. It's not like they're unerringly accurate, because you can be subsumed by chaos that's so total that even if you face it, you're not going to prevail. I mean, that's why people die. That's one way of looking at it anyways. But the mythology basically says this is your best bet. If there's a process that's going to work, this is it. And so, and then you might think, well, the better you do it, the better the chances are of success, or the more consistently you do it, the better the chances of success are. And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it. Okay, so anyways, Pinocchio's down at the bottom of the ocean, and every time he says he's trying to find out where Monstro is, and they ask questions to the fish that are down there, but every time they mention Monstro's name, all the fish disappear. And it's like Voldemort, right? He's the guy whose name you cannot say. And Monstro is precisely that. It's the thing that frightens everyone. And so asking questions down there isn't helping very much, and so Pinocchio, what he does is he's calling for his father, and he keeps going deeper and deeper into the depths. And we're in a scene, there's a scene where the darkness of the ocean turns into an even more profound darkness, and that's what Pinocchio disappears into. And then we see Monstro, he's in this sort of foggy representation, this huge thing that lies very much at the bottom. And there's no life or anything around him except, I think these are mackerel, but maybe they're tuna. They're animated anyway, so it doesn't matter. But there's no life down there. He's so far down at the bottom of the ocean that there's nothing that's alive down there. So, and then we go inside the whale, which is of course absurd, and we see that the whale has eaten a boat at some point in the past. This is one whopping whale. And Geppetto is sitting with the kitten, of all things. He's also got that little goldfish bowl full of goldfish with him too, which is quite the feat. Anyways, he's sitting there, and he knows that he's trapped in the belly of the whale too, and that he can't get out. And so that's an interesting issue. It's because not only is Pinocchio lacking his father, which isn't a good thing, but the father is lacking the son. And there's some indication that the father can't get out of the whale without the son. And so it's like the possibility for order is down there in this chaotic state, but unless there's an active agent to go seek it out, it can't pull itself. It's not animated enough to get out by itself. You know, and you could say, well, there's wisdom in the libraries, but it's not going to, like, without you going in there and gathering it and embodying it, all it does is sit there in potential, in all of that implicit form. That's a good way of thinking about it. So anyways, Geppetto is feeling pretty hopeless because he can't figure out any way of getting out of the whale, and he's also starving. He's starving in the belly of the whale. And here's a way of thinking about that. Geppetto's a good guy, but he's old. And that means his way of doing things is no longer fruitful. That's why he's starving. And it's especially not fruitful because he's missing his son. He's missing the active element that the child represents, say the playful and transformative element that the child represents. And so if you get stuck doing something the same old way, at some point it's no longer going to work. Even if it was good at some point, it has to be updated. And it's updated by, let's call it the spirit of youth, or the spirit of attention, or the spirit of play, something like that. The willingness to break boundaries and take risks. And Geppetto is very, very skilled, but he doesn't have that. And that's symbolized by the loss of his son. That's why he was out looking for his son too. He needs him. And so they're in despair down there, trying to fish and not getting anything. And so Monstro wakes up. Mackerel happens to swim by, and Monstro wakes up. And so then he starts, I think they're tuna actually. They look like tuna to me. And so Monstro wakes up, and he opens his mouth, and a bunch of water starts to come in. And then you see Pinocchio with the fish. Now, there's very intense implicit Christian symbolism in this part of the film, and I'm going to lay it out point by point. So you may remember, and perhaps you don't know, that one of the symbols for Christ is a fish, ichthys, right? And that's a play on the Greek representation of Christ's name. But there's more to it than that, because all of Christ's followers are fishermen. And he performs a bunch of miracles with fish. And fish are strange things because, well, you can pull them up out of the depths. That's part of it. And so they're things that can be pulled out of the depth. And you could say that, it's going to be very difficult for me to take this apart, but you could say in some sense that Christ is a meta-fish. A fish is something that you can dine on, but a way of being is something that provides you with something to dine on a continual basis. And so you might say, well, is it better to have a fish or to be a fisherman? That's another way of thinking about it. And obviously it's better to be a fisherman because then you can get more fish. And so it's one thing to have something, but it's another thing completely to know how to generate good things. And so if you had any sense, you'd take the latter over the former, even though the former is more instantaneously gratifying and requires less work and responsibility. And so anyways, the whale opens his mouth and goes chasing these fish. And Pinocchio he's trying to get the hell out of there, even though he wants to find the whale. When he actually sees the whale, he leaves. And that's also a very common mythological what would you call it? Plot element. It's very frequently that what happens when the hero first sees the terrible thing, the dragon say, the terrible thing that he's come to conquer, he like freezes and gets the hell out of there because it's far worse than he thought it was going to be. And so Pinocchio, it's like, no way, man, I'm not going near that whale. Away he swims, and he's actually at the forefront of all the fish, which is quite interesting too. So in the meantime, Monstro has opened his mouth and the fish are pouring in, and Geppetto is fishing like mad, and he's catching fish like crazy. And so the little cat is, Geppetto is flinging the fish backwards into this like box, and the little cat is there whacking them to kill them while they're flopping around. And so they're pretty excited about this because they have a problem. The problem is how to get out of the whale. That's the actual problem. But a nested problem inside that is how not to starve to death. And so Geppetto is pretty happy that even though he's not getting out of the whale, that he gets to have something to eat. So you could say as well that he's not exactly focused on the right thing. He's focused on the micro problem instead of the macro problem. And that makes him kind of blind